I think there's just a general recognition that the technology is real. It can actually solve complex business context problems. And it's not just a chatbot. What we're finding as newer AI technology gets in the market, the bottleneck is starting to become the network. There will be like 2030, there'll be no IT service industry, no BPO left.
Hey guys, if you're loving the conversations we are having here on the Domino Effect, take a quick second to hit that like button.
And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. Every single subscription helps us trigger that next big domino.
Exactly. Growing the channel is what allows us to bring on even bigger guests and keep leveling up the content we make for you.
So drop a like, hit subscribe, and let's keep this chain reaction going. Now back to the episode.
Jaison, thanks for joining. For the audience, Jaison is Managing Director, Senior Partner from BCG. I'm so happy for Jaison to join us. And again, I'm here with Girish, my co-host, and looking forward to the discussion. So we wanted to kind of bring you on board because you see different industries from different lens, right? You're in strategy consulting. You've been in that industry for almost 15, 20 years. For the audience who does not know, can you give us a download on a quick brief, maybe
Yeah, of
about
course.
yourself first, and then what is strategy consulting and where does BCG kind of fit into that industry?
I'll be quick on myself. I went to Arizona for undergrad. I did chemical engineering. Didn't know what at Arizona. Like, don't really know what strategy consulting is. Went into I went into process engineering after school for a laser tech company. That was my first like intro into like semiconductors and lasers. Then did product management for a couple of years, which was really interesting because I grew up an engineer, had done like obviously chemical engineering, was in like literally in the wafer fab designing and making and processing the chips. And then product management gave me like a really good purview into like the business side of running a tech company because you're in charge of the product roadmap, looking at competitors, looking at like how you should think about pricing, product obsolescence. And I realized like that was fun, but I didn't really have like any of the, I was like kind of making it up as I go. So I really wanted to get more exposure to the business side of running a tech company. And then at that time, me and one of my friends, Beth, who you both know, we were looking at business schools as an option. We were like in our mid 20s at the time. I got into Kellogg, went to Kellogg for the full time program for a couple of years there. Me and Sonia moved to Chicago, and that's when I found out about strategy consulting. And for me, it was like being in business school is almost like a extension of business school where you're like learning how to advise companies on complex strategic problems, but obviously in the real world versus like in case studies in B school, right? So I actually joined consulting thinking that I'd do for a couple of years, like actually put some of the theory that I learned in B school into practice at BCG and then go back into industry. And now I've been at BCG for 16 years. And the reason I've stayed is to your question, like what is strategy consulting? Like at a high level, I describe it as like you're for large companies, and we work primarily with large companies, but some midsize as well. You're a mix of a performance coach and like a team doctor, if you like put it in like a sports team analogy, right? You're bringing in best practices, you're bringing in strategic guidance, you're doing a lot of analytical, rigorous work to come up with recommendations on what they need to do differently, pressure test assumptions, and then put the recommendations into play. So it's not like you give them a deck and say, here's the answer, but you actually work with the organization to make that change actually happen, which honestly is the harder part about versus just coming up with the answer. So in a nutshell, it's like you get a really good purview into how companies run, how to effectively make change happen within a large organization, how to think strategically and think ahead from competitive standpoint, and how it relates with tech is like now pretty much every industry is getting disrupted with tech. Has been happening for like started with digital transformation, now with AI, right? So even though we do strategy consulting, is very much for everything that we do, there is a technology lens to it because it's by design. You have to embrace technology in any industry you're in, uh, or competitors are going to eat you alive, right? So to me, like that's strategy consulting in a nutshell.
Yeah, so before we get into AI, which I know is the meat of our discussion here, what I wanted to, just for our young audiences out there, right? So someone who's just starting out in consulting and say they want to make a career out of consulting, you've actually, you know, sort of had the dream path. Not saying it was easy, but you had the dream path of starting out, right as an associate and then moving up the ranks as you got the experience and as you got the exposure up to now you're managing a book of business and you're sort of you're treated as a partner of a firm in profit sharing. So what are some of the qualities or ingredients that you would, or what guidance would you give our young viewers out there if they want to follow a similar path or achieve what you would achieve in either BCG or any other consulting firm, right?
Look, I think there's a question of getting in and making successful once you're in. I mean, we are quite selective, as the other firms are, in the people we bring in. There is a rigorous process for both associates and consultants that are in BA school that you got to go through. Primarily, is like solving the case interviews that we do. So it's a very unique setup that consulting firms have. That you do like an actual case, with actual like math you're writing down and everything. And that's like it's kind of like taking the GMAT. You kind of have to learn how to do consulting case interviews. You can't just wing it. So there's an element of that, which I think is like table stakes. And like to be like the value proposition of consulting, strategy consulting, is it gives you like very quickly in like a couple of years a really really solid toolkit for business problem solving, and it teaches you everything from how do you like frame up a problem, come up with hypotheses, like actually go get data internally or externally to pressure test things. How do you communicate that? How do you get stakeholder alignment within an organization? How do you then put that into implementation? It gives you like really solid tools to either be like an exec at a company, run your own business, work for a PE firm, whatever it is. And also gives you good exit options as well when you leave consulting, because people are going to know that if you've been consulting for a couple of years, you kind of have those skill sets, right? Now, there's a different question then on like why people stay, why I've stayed, and like what's that value proposition. For me, really, it is every couple of years at BCG and even the other firms, you're essentially reinventing yourself. Like in the first couple of years, you're an analyst or a consultant. You're the ones that is doing the research, making the slides, coming up with the data analysis and all that stuff. Then as soon as you get good at that, you get promoted and you're a project manager. Now you're like running a large engagement, like interfacing directly with senior clients, working through like a very complex problem and like sprinting towards weekly deliverables. And that's like a very good project management skill set to have, as well as like broader strategic thinking. And then as soon as you get good at that, then you're promoted again. And now you have to be more thinking about, okay, how do you personally start building your own brand? What are you known for within the firm? How do you bring in business? How do you actually build relationships with senior clients and build topic expertise that you're known for and start essentially selling work, right? And then as soon as you start showing elements of that, you get promoted to being an equity partner. And that's a whole different ballgame. Yeah, at that point, you're essentially, so at BCG, we have, we're a we're actually the largest private partnership in the world, where we have 2,000 partners that all have an equal vote in all our governance. We don't have a board of directors. We are like, there's no board that sits on top of BCG. Like we are like the 2,000 partners are the board. So it's a very unique setup where you really are an entrepreneur. Like you're in a partnership, you have equals, you have the BCG brand, but you can essentially, like within limits of like you need to perform, obviously, you kind of get to do what you want.
And BCG is public, right? It's
No,
not a
we're private. No, it's a private partnership that is owned 100% by the active 2,000 partners of the firm.
Okay.
So, and then when a partner leaves, like you essentially sell the equity to the next generation that's coming up. So it really is like we determine the fate of the company, what we do strategically. Everything, it comes down to the 2,000 partners deciding what we want to do with the firm. So it's a very unique setup. It's not like we're working for a public company reporting to a board. You have that level of ownership. I think people like, especially the partner, I think you kind of like the ownership, the autonomy of you get to do whatever you want, invent yourself if you want to, go into any type of business you want to. And that's honestly what's kept me at BCG for 16 years is like, I decided in 2018 we were starting up a new office in Austin, and decided then that, hey, me and Sonia were gonna move to Austin, and I was gonna be part of the founding team to start that office. Then I ran that office for 4 years, grew it from like 20 people to 150 people in 4 years, built a bunch of local clients, and then handed over to someone else when we moved out of Boston. So that was an incredible experience. Now I'm building clients in high tech, obviously doing work in AI as everyone is. And it's like and as a senior partner, you're doing more of the relationship and client building and less of the actual project execution, which is also kind of nice. There's a nice change that I've had in the last couple of years as well.
And like, what were some things you kind of used to like reinvent yourself? So you said like you had to reinvent yourself every 2 years. Were there any strategies, personal strategies, or how did you kind of make those decisions?
Yeah, it's hard to put into words, but like the biggest thing that you learn at BCG is learning from others. So the folks that are the most successful at BCG, obviously you come in with some level of like you work hard, reasonably smart, and you can like get stuff done, right? That's like based on expectation. But the folks that do well are essentially sponges who learn in a case team environment on how to do something, and that's happens at every level. So when you're first starting off, you're like learning how to even like solve a problem, which is pretty ambiguous. When a project leader, you're given like, yeah, here's this 8-week engagement to go figure out the AI strategy for a SaaS company. You're like, okay, what the hell do I do with that? Right. So you learn from others on how to actually do that. And then you learn the first time and you get better at it. Right. And then for me, like my reinvention was I learned from some of my mentors on how do you build a high performing team. So it's very different than like building a client, right? I learned like, hey, we usually go to market as like a group of partners that have like people under us that are our people. And we had a very high performing team in my Dallas office. And I learned from that. We had an amazing leadership team over there. And when we started the Austin office, essentially I wanted to replicate. So me and a couple other partners, how we reinvented that and built that as a new office was picking up some of the learnings that we had from our mentors and doing it in a different context, right? So and then the other reinvention that happens when a new topic comes on, right? Like for now, say so we're doing a lot of work right now on AI in software engineering. Like how do you actually get the most value from AI for software developers? That wasn't really a topic that BCG was working on 3 years ago. And a couple of partners started engaging with certain clients and started doing some work there. And they found out that they liked that type of work. They'll actually do some more research on it. They will do like co-funded project with clients to do some studies on what actually works versus not. And then they become thought leaders in it. Right. So, and then they've then become the BCG experts on a specific topic. And then they become like a topic expert or like a global topic
Got it.
expert.
Yeah.
So something that didn't even exist 2 years ago, now there's someone at BCG that is like the global topic expert for what we call generative engineering.
Yeah.
Right. So that gives you like, so that's like there's no like one answer, but you have the flexibility to like figure out what your path is. You have the support and the infrastructure to try to do what you want to do. But obviously you got to have the initiative, drive, grit to actually get it done, because there isn't like a clear playbook to follow.
Right.
I think mentorship and having good mentors along the way helps, right? Accelerate some of that, right? Which I know is more of a luxury, I would say, than a norm, at least from my experience. Just the fact that, of course, table stakes are you need to have grit and you have to have your own personal drive and all of that. But I also feel like balancing that with, really good mentorship early on that shape your career will really help. And it sounds like that's what you've had the luxury of having early on in your career.
Yeah, I think it's like critical for success. It actually started with our founder, Bruce Henderson. He had like the majority shares of the company because it was his firm and he started it, etc. And he essentially, when he retired, he didn't sell his equity and like have the firm buy his equity, right? So, which most founders would have done. And what he said was like, I'm giving the current partners of the firm, I'm giving the firm to you. I'm giving you my shares. Like that was like a big moment for us. And so because that is also why we've never gone public. We never tried to go public is we take care of the firm for the next generation. It's always about the next generation. And to your point of mentorship, Girish, like it's ingrained in every BCGer that you are here because of the people before you, and it's your job to take care of the people that are coming up with you. And so mentorship and apprenticeship are like cornerstones of what success with BCG.
Yeah, very, very critical for sure. Let's, you touched on AI a little bit there. So I'm going to ask a very broad question, and then obviously we can narrow it down into specifics because it's obviously AI is such a broad, it's an overused word, I think, in today's times. And so in the world of consulting, how do you, where customers have access to, the top 4 or 5 AI tools out there that can, that I don't want to say replaces, junior level associates in what they do and not taking away the important work that they do, but at least from a perception standpoint, customers perceive that, hey, the lower level jobs is something that I can actually just you open up Gemini and create create a research that I would pay a lot of money to a consultant like a BCG, right? And not to undermine the value of what you do, but do you see that? Do you see as we go into this AI, and I know AI is still maturing, and so it's not quite there yet. But do you actually face that resistance, or do you feel that it's harder to sell the value prop in this day and age?
Not at all. I'll tell you why. Zero. And so so a little bit more context, right? Like strategy consulting hasn't been static. Like the work we do now, so again, been in the firm 16 years. Like a simple strategy project that we did, like market entry type strategy project that we did, or a due diligence that we did 5-10 years ago, was wildly like less sophisticated than what we do right now. Like we have so much more expertise, different data sources. Our teams move a lot faster than they did before. So the output that you get as a client now versus 5-10 years ago is like wildly different, right? So we've evolved. But what's the thing that we have to do now is what AI is doing is forcing us. We've always been evolving. We need to evolve at a much more rapid pace. And I do see, by the way, that there are going to be some consulting firms that don't see AI as a future threat that will get disrupted. It hasn't. I don't know if it's happening yet. I think it's happening in like maybe like some of the lower tier consulting firms or like the research firms and stuff like Gartner. Maybe like you can do deep research and get something that you would have got at Gartner, right? It's like I think that Garish is like a good comparison that you were talking about. So how we're transforming is we are rapidly changing the way we do work. Like we have, I mean, I'm like probably I don't know, like over I don't know, to give a number because it'll be a wrong number. We have like thousands of agents that we built internally to automate, and not just automate, but also make some of the workflows that we used to do much more robust. So give you an example, like when we do a pricing diagnostic, we might say, hey, we're going to take like put all the transaction data from a client. We're going to take this last 2 months of data for this specific product line. We can do a bunch of pricing analysis for it and show the client that, hey, for this one SKU, we did a bunch of analysis and you've been mispricing certain places where you should be, like you didn't think about elasticity and you left like $3 million on the table by not doing this right in the last couple of months. That's what we would have done. Now with the right AI tools, we can essentially do that a lot faster and go a lot deeper. So both the breadth and depth of what we do is fundamentally different now than what we could without the AI tools that we have right now. Same thing with research, right? Like coming up to speed on industry, coming with a point of view. Our clients, our consultants before used to read up when they start a project. They used to read all like the prior materials that we had on. Let me tell you what the semiconductor 101, right? Like learn all that stuff. Now everyone starts with Claude or ChatGPT and comes up to speed. And like you shouldn't be showing up to any meeting without having AI having like pressure tested your work plan, your slides, your insights, and like your output should be step change different now than it was 3 years ago because you have the right tools for you. So what we've been doing is making our consultants a lot more like we're augmenting them with AI, not replacing them with AI, but we're augmenting them with AI, right? So that's like one dimension, and I think that's kept us ahead of where like a client could do themselves. The second thing,
Is there one
yeah,
question I have on Jason on that
yeah,
follow up is clients can do the same thing. Is the advantage consulting companies have is the amount of data you have collected over time from other projects or other cases you have worked on?
it is. It is somewhat an advantage. We have benchmarks. We have a lot of proprietary methodologies that we do. I don't think that is like that's not like our only moat. So our moat is staying ahead of clients. What you said, Bandeep, is absolutely true. That's one dimension of it. We have our own proprietary secret sauce that we bring. But then the other piece is in BCG we call this as the how BCG adds value is insight, impact, and trust. So the insight piece, think of it as like coming up with a cool analysis and cool research, and that you could argue like maybe uh, without BCG's proprietary data, without our amazing tools, like a client can get like 80% of the way there themselves, right? Maybe that might be true in certain cases. But what we don't get paid for slides though. We don't get paid for a report. What we get paid for is the second two things is like using our trusted relationships and the trust we have within all levels of the organization to create impact. And the only reason clients pay us millions of dollars, because like 80% of our revenues come from existing clients. So obviously clients like the work we do and then they hire more. We do more work for the same clients. The only reason to do that is we drive 10x value versus what they paid us. And we actually drive outcomes, not just a report, right? So as long as consultants don't forget the fact that their value isn't only in the insight, in the smart ideas, it's about actually driving impact and building trust with the organization to actually ingest that impact and make it real. I think the industry will be fine.
Yeah, and I think
Are
Jason,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Jason, I think you hit on a critical point that I was going to ask, which is you're essentially, clients are paying you for outcomes, not the, not for a slide or a deck or whatever, right? So, I think there's a balance between how much AI can actually help you, but how do you actually build in the trust and credibility, right? So if I put my customer hat on, I say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to open up Claude and I'm going to ask, do a bunch of prompt engineering to get me a report that I want. How do I have the expertise to then validate? We talk about human in the loop to validate the AI. I mean, at least my experience with AI can be very convincing to tell you something that you probably want to hear or see, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I think one of the value adds that I see, and I would love to know your take on it is another value is okay, look, you definitely have everyone has access to AI tools, everyone can churn out a report in 30 minutes, an hour. But how do you actually then layer on the expertise that you have, like all the data points that you have that you built over the past 10, 15, 20 years? No, nothing can beat experience, right? At the end of the day, how do you know what you're getting? The research that you're doing is actually on point to give you the outcome you're looking to ultimately achieve, right? Is that something that you see also a value prop?
It is. I was actually, you raised a really good point. Like, I think one reinvention that needs to happen with all consulting firms is the importance. So what we used to tell people when I joined BCG, and we probably still do it now, is you can be a generalist, you can work on a consumer project, you can work on a tech project, you can work on healthcare. And the beauty of BCG is you get to do all those things. And then at some point you might specialize. I think reality is domain expertise will become more and more critical earlier on. So I think that you're exactly right, Greece. Like you can't just take an answer for face value. Like the domain expertise becomes incredibly important to not just to pressure test, but also push the thinking versus just like surface level insights. I think the other piece is what I think is important also is there's an element of creativity. There's an element of, like you said, like pulling in experience from other industries, other context. But that's the piece I think humans will still always have is the ability to dream, the ability to like come up with something completely outside the box. Because AI is still somewhat deterministic and it is going to find the answers that are the highest probable answers. And till someone comes up with something that's better than that, like I think the critical human skill is going to be creativity. And specific to consulting, I think like the domain expertise becomes incredibly important.
Yeah, yeah.
Think CEOs are taking the lead. There was one interesting point in that report, which if you can kind of provide more color. the article was saying 4 to 5 CEOs are confident that AI will achieve ROI this year. And a lot of the Eastern CEOs in India or Greater China were more confident in that versus the Western counterparts. I guess like what has changed between last year and this year, where they're more confident, the CEOs are more confident about AI and the value proposition versus last year and this year.
I'll hit both your points. I think there's just a general recognition that the technology is real. It can actually solve complex business context problems. And it's not just a chatbot, but it's actually agents that are like taking action versus just giving insights. So, and especially with I think the biggest change has been the like with Cursor and like Claude Code and stuff, the ability to quickly do prototyping to development, all that stuff, right? There's a lot of at scale deployments that have happened in the last year, 18 months that weren't really there in 2023, 2024 that are giving CEOs more confidence that, hey, we can actually get a lot of productivity with these new tools at scale. Interesting point you raised on like the Eastern CEOs versus Western ones. I think it is true. Like they're probably getting more traction than in the West in overall. Let's say at an average level. I think it comes down to in that same study, the BCG 2026 AI radar, which
Yeah,
is actually a really
yeah,
good report that you referenced. There is a 12x improvement in AI productivity success when a CEO is driving it. So
Mhm.
some of this has to be top down, and in a lot of Asian cultures, like the organization is very top down, right? Versus like I primarily worked with companies in the US, and usually it's like, okay, let's give everyone the tools, let's get them to adopt the tools, let's check how they're doing. No one's really forcing a top down mandate. What ends up happening then is you have the same people, you have essentially people them running a function for the last 20 years, looking at AI as a way to make their function more productive versus thinking, how do I completely reimagine my function and almost like pretend it didn't exist?
yeah, yeah.
Right. So that's the folks that are cutting edge are thinking reinventing versus like automating certain tasks.
Right.
Mm.
That brings up a good point. Also, like if I think about companies, and I don't know, keep me honest here, companies which are being run by founders in West, it is kind of like a top down bottom structure, right? The founder, the CEO is kind of pushing that, hey, like we need to be in AI, and they have a strategy in place, and then everybody has to kind of follow, right,
Yeah.
the founders.
I think that's
So
really true.
yeah,
I think what founders have are both like the ability to like say, I'm just going to do it. Right. But also they have scarcity of resources. When they don't have an HR function, I was like, there was like a founder dinner in the valley, and they were asking questions around like to like 20 founders or something. Hey, who's used AI to write job recs? Everyone's hand goes up. Who's used AI to screen resumes? 70% of everyone's hands went up. And then
yeah,
the last question was like, so who actually has an HR function? And very few hands actually went up, right? So if you have an existing HR function with thousands of people, they're going to go screen interviews. They're going to
yes,
go do interviews. They're going to go write job recs because that's their job. If you're an AI native organization, you can almost reinvent a lot of things with some human in the loop. And you definitely have an advantage to move faster because you can essentially build a agent-based organization with very little humans. So
yeah,
I actually there's like some of my clients, I do tell them that like the biggest threat I see for them isn't their direct competitors. It is like a completely new startup that has like 10 million
native
in funding
AI,
or something.
native startup,
Mm.
Yep,
which is fully agentic. Yeah,
exactly. Because they
I
have
don't know if you.
no, you know the term innovator's dilemma, right? Like that's the issue
Yeah,
here.
yeah, 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 yeah.
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 I don't know if you saw the article yesterday where Square, Jack Dorsey basically announced 4,000
Mhm.
job cuts, so almost like half the organization. So, do you have a take on that?
I don't know if that is like, look, that's a unique example of a company that hasn't been doing as well. Stocks are down like 80% or something.
Yeah,
And He, I'm sure, wanted a stock bump. I think there's a mix of it. I think there definitely is. I guarantee they're getting AI productivity in software development, in customer support, etc. Right. At the same time, 50% headcount reduction, I don't think is the norm for a company that is doing well. Like most of my clients, like they're not worried. Like most of my software clients, they're not worried about like, hey, how do I can get more productive with AI and I can get rid of engineers. They're not thinking that at all. They're thinking, how do I disrupt my software product to be AI first? And how do I get my engineers to work on that? My product teams and my engineering teams work on that versus writing code, right? So I think there's still, for healthy companies that are growing, I think there is still resource scarcity. Look, that said, all companies overhired in the pandemic. They probably add a bunch of layers as well, and they will use AI as a way to justify job,
Augment their
yeah,
workforce. Yeah.
yeah. So that's going to happen.
So
Here's a question
in the
that
same line, like when you are talking to leadership or other companies, what is your recommendation or strategies you're kind of asking them to deploy to have successful AI pilots to a production AI system? Are
So we
there any
did a
strategies
yeah.
utilizing or recommending?
So more than the, obviously, like the have, I think, like top down view on reinvent workflows, don't automate tasks. That's like you're going to drive value when you actually pick a workflow like code to cash and completely reinvent it versus saying, here's a finance bot, here's a sales ops bot, here's a customer success bot. We're way past that. That was like 3 years ago. CEO top down is definitely important. We not in this study, but we did a piece of research a couple of years ago on what drives successful AI transformations. And the interesting finding from that was, if you run a regression as BCG does, like on what drives success, only 10% of the value for successful AI transformations came from the actual AI algorithms, the actual AI itself. 20% came from the data and the technology underneath. So obviously, the AI can't go into your systems, pull your data, pull your CRM data is kind of useless, right? So, but 20% of the value is that. But 70% of the value comes from process and organization changes. I think we all, like, with these shiny new tools, we underestimate the value of how, especially with large organizations, how hard like change management is, how much you have to retrain people, you have to drive adoption, you have to change process flows as well, right? Like this is a couple of years ago now, but I was working for we did some work for um, the marketing function of a tech company, and they were like essentially using AI to write all their personalized marketing material. They're doing all the localization and like customization using AI, and they built, instead of taking 3 months to get a new, like all the collateral for a new product done, they did it in 3 weeks, which is great. But then they forgot that legal had to do all the reviews after that, so they got stuck in legal review for 2 months after that. So in the end of the day, nothing changed because they didn't
Yeah.
change the full process flow. It's that's where things are getting stuck right now. Like you got to set a bold ambition, you got to reinvent processes, reinvent workflows completely, and you got to focus on the 70%, which is not the tech, not the data. That's important, but without getting the process changes, the people trained and change management, all that stuff, nothing's going to happen.
So, Jason, I wanted to. You wrote a very, very recent article, or you co-authored rather, a very recent article on 6G and how that is the future of AI, right? So, as we all know, just for our listeners to take a step back, 5G is the standard today. It's been around for a while. It's sort of the standard. And how I view 5G, and maybe I would love to get your perspective, is it sets the foundation. Right? If I have to do it, if I have to compare it to a simple analogy as a house, right? It's your foundation. You need the foundation to be super strong, however mundane or however onerous it is. You need to have a strong foundation in order for you to then be able to enhance upon it, right? So everyone knows 5G has been the gold standard for quite a while now. There's talk about obviously upgrading, and every 5 or 10 years, there's always an upgrade to networks. I know the upgrades in telecom is not as frequent or fast as some of the other tech sectors. How do you see the new 6G in terms of, do you see that as the de facto standard for any AI technology or governance or applications in the future? Is that like sort of like the absolute default that companies and governments need to adopt 6G?
It's a good question. I don't know if it's so. Just to take before I answer, take a step back, right? Like the reason we did this piece on 6G is what we're finding as newer AI technology gets in the market. The bottleneck is starting to become the network, right? So the 5G network, and the reason is 5G was built for essentially like super fast download speeds. No one really cared about uplink. And so it's all about like, how can I like think like 8 years ago, it was all about like, how quickly can I download a movie on my phone? Am I getting like 4K resolution video on my phone? That is what the value prop of 5G really was. In AI, like you want real time processing to happen at the edge. And the reason that's important is when you don't think about like ChatGPT AI, think about real time transcription, where that's happening, like say on this podcast, right? If there's real time transcription happening right now, that is actually happening on the device with some uplink back to the cloud for like more complex stuff. If I'm wearing like the new Ray-Ban Meta glasses, that's doing like live captions right there. That is like literally built on a hybrid AI protocol that is like doing most of the processing on edge and offloading some to the cloud. So the uplink gets a lot more important, and that has become the bottleneck now. That one of the reasons we thought 6G was important is we don't want the network to become the bottleneck for AI. Um, the other piece that is linked to that is right now, all the conversations about generative AI very quickly, and even at CES this year, it's already shifted towards physical AI. Right? It's all about humanoids, autonomous factories, drones, swarms of drones, technology like that requires a fundamentally different network architecture than what exists right now in our cellular networks. Think about like drones like communicating with each other and like flying next to each other and stuff. That's a very different standards needed for that. Think about like one of the things that um, they're thinking through is actually being able to have almost like country level, city level, country level sensing networks where you can have monitoring happen for any drone type threats. Like you have like like all these your feeder drones doing real stuff they're supposed to be doing, but also monitoring for rogue drones, things like that you can't really do with radar these days. So it's not fast enough, right? So G helps solve some of those more physical AI problems that, again, we don't want to get bottlenecked by a network and want the technology to get to unleash itself. So the imperative for governments is actually, and we're actually going to. This is part one of a two-part series that'll come later in the year on specifically what's the regulation, safety standards, spectrum needs, R&D investments needed to actually make all this happen. 5G was a monumental task to get done. A lot of collaboration across tech, public sector. And 6G is going to be probably even more complicated. There's a lot that needs to be done on that topic. So that's why we wrote that piece, is to get the conversation started.
What
Say,
is the greatest risk you see for G adoption? Like, will it be technical complexity or different global standards across?
Sorry, but there was a question. The biggest,
Like, what would be the greatest risk for like 6G adoption? Like,
yeah,
because if you see like if China has a different
yeah,
standard versus India has a different standard versus
that's probably
US
the
has a
biggest risk.
yeah.
In 5G, we weren't in a bifurcated tech world as we are right now. So there was a race for 5G on who's going to win and set the standards, which the US won. But there are global standards for 5G, which has actually been very helpful for the full ecosystem to be able to draft off of. In 6G, very likely we could see a bifurcated solution where there is a China plus model and a rest of the world model or Western model that might emerge. So that to me, Mandeep, is like it's a really good question. It's like that the biggest risk is the lack of standards being set by the different government entities, and especially now with the U.S. not being as friendly with the NATO countries, that makes it even worse and even fragments things even more than it did before.
it also, I think, because I was also reading, of course, this is sometime in the future, not happening now, on AGI, right? It's artificial general intelligence, which is essentially how do you have different countries across the world, get on a unified single platform, similar to what we have the internet, right? It's all the World Wide Web standards, right? How do you come up with, because eventually I would say, I mean, I think siloing the AI, it works to a certain point. I understand the the security behind it, the relevance for at a geo level. But at some point, I think you do need to have that framework in order to truly be as seamless as what we call the internet today, right? And I think that's regulation is going to have a hard, challenging time catching up with the tech. I feel, as it always is, right?
Yep. It's an incredibly tough problem in a polarized world, in a polarized country, polarized world. And it's also like the other thing about regulation, especially AI, is like they're all in a race. Every country, well, not every, but like China and the US are in a race for AGI, right? Which is why like we're blocking them from getting NVIDIA chips, all this stuff, right? So there's a bit of prisoner's dilemma on our side as well. On like if we stifle AI innovation too much, is China gonna essentially go there anyways, because we think that they're not going to have as strict standards as we would on regulation, right? So it's a extremely tough problem, and we're not there yet, but like in the next year or so, like we're gonna have to have a good answer for it. And at this point, like the biggest worry I have about AI is that exactly. It's like they're only seeing like agents like with OpenClaw, right? You can just like anyone can go and build an army of agents to do whatever they want. And that this is like at a one person level. I think about countries having resources and taking advantage of AI for the wrong reasons. And unless we all come to some level of accords on what we're all going to be doing, it's going to get very messy.
It's such a fascinating time, right? Because I mean, at least now, AI is semi-mature, I would say, where you still need a human in the loop. Imagine, like you said, a year, 2 years, or maybe even 5 years down the line, where things get so complex, where you touched upon where you have drones monitoring other drones, you know, super drones monitoring worker bee drones. At what point does it get so complex that humans are just not able to? And maybe I'm fantasizing a little bit, in today's world, but at what point does it get so complex and so challenging that us humans are unable to solve a problem that goes wrong with this complex architecture? And I think time will tell, right?
Yeah, this kind of situation, right? That's what we
Yeah.
all don't want to happen. But
Yeah.
like we're headed down a path right now where no one is standing in the way, and no one is coming up with constructive solutions what actually good to go do. So if you go down this path, it's going to be a matter of time till that actually happens. And again, like the issue is the prisoner's dilemma of like if we stifle ourselves too much, does someone else take advantage?
Somebody else will
Yep.
take
Mhm.
advantage.
So it has to be like a global solution.
I guess like stepping back to the 6G question, do you see telecom operators play a larger role where like they own the data, they own the pipeline, and they are providing the AI models as a service to like third-party developers?
I don't think it's the models themselves. I think they can do more already with G. There's different, like they have the ability to do software defined networks, but they can splice the network in different ways, but they can get like different quality of service to different folks, right? So they only do a different bandwidth, but you can also do different, like differing differential latency, reliability, etc. So I think the biggest advantage for them is going to be monetizing the ability to splice a network in different ways and not have like a one size fits all model, and use that as a way to actually have a better play in the ecosystem. I think that to them adopting 6G standards for AI, like will give them the ability to be forward thinking about how to do that, how to be the first ones that are actually setting the standards versus like the hyperscalers or some of the other frontier model companies, and then be in the room when those discussions are happening on how do they actually split the value from all that stuff. What would be bad is they take a more passive view, sit back, it takes too much time, and then a little similar to 5G, monetizations don't really the monetization doesn't really flow to them. What happened in 5G? By the way, there's $1 trillion of value creation just with 5G so far in like economic value worldwide. Trillion.
Yeah.
Wow.
But unfortunately, very, 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 very small slice of that went to the operators. A lot of it went to obviously consumers, but mostly think about the Ubers,
The application layer.
all the app players are the ones that
Yeah.
really benefited from like much, much, much more like reliable connectivity, always on reliable connectivity. So that's like the imperative for telcos that I'm going to be talking about with them next week
Yeah.
at Mobile World Congress.
Mobile World Congress. Nice.
The other thing that and the other side to all of this is that I don't know if people are talking enough about it, or perhaps it's passive. It is the amount of energy that's going to be required to just support an AI infrastructure. Like I know, for example, and that's a big thing, right? And that is real, that is physical. That's having a grid that can actually support not just all of the demands that your AI needs, but also how do you run a country, right? You need a power grid to be able to run a country, and that's a very real problem. That's a physical problem, and not something that's virtual, right? Like I know in India, for example, they're already talking about not having. So when they had the AI summit, they talked about where all of the AI applications or the energy that's required to support the infrastructure is not going to be on the existing energy grid because that's already overworked, that's already overtaxed.
Yeah.
The grid can just not handle to do it, right? Now I know India is a developing nation and has it has a lot more population than some of the Western world, but they're building a new grid, a nuclear grid, right? That's completely separate from your day-to-day energy needs that you need to live your life. Do you see that being, a huge challenge in something that the regulators would have to? Is that a real problem even in the Western world?
Absolutely, it's a real problem. You're already seeing it with like Trump in the State of the Union. Essentially, was saying that like the hyperscalers need to essentially build, like get their own power, right? So that is actually good because I think before that there's a bit of like, well, who should really front the capex for all this stuff? We're only spending a bunch of capex on chips and data centers. Do we also want to spend on power? I actually think it's a really good thing for the country, for the world, that there is this new renaissance in energy generation, right? So you're already seeing nuclear have a revival. There's no reason it shouldn't, and we just haven't really needed it. So now there's a real need for it, and there's people that will back it, right? So the good thing about that is, I think there's enough. My sense is there's enough local states that are really looking for cutting down the red tape to get some of those new reactors, generators, etc., installed. That I'm not that worried about that in the U.S. at least. The other piece that I'm excited about is like it's also restarted discussions on like things like cold fusion, like the ex founder Twilio, Jeff Lawson, is doing he got almost like $500 million funding for a cold fusion startup. And they're looking at like that's the good thing now. It's like a lot of money's everyone's seeing that as a critical bottleneck, like you said, Girish. So
There's a lot of investments going
capital is
in
flowing
that.
towards that,
Yeah.
right? Which for something that's like desperately needed. And we didn't really think about it till we had those like crazy storms in Texas, and everyone realized a couple of years ago, everyone realized how fragile the current grid is. So if anything, I think there might be like some short-term pain, but in the next 3 to 5 years, as more generation comes online and just money flows into that and regulation gets cut and all that innovation happens, we'll end up in a better spot for it as a country because like we would have upgraded like 30, 40-year-old technology because of this like once in a lifetime shift that's happening with AI and data centers.
Yeah, it's
Also curious to see like shifting gears to the world, right? Like India specifically, they had the AI summit recently, I think last month or 2 months back. There was a lot of focus on where does India kind of stand in this stage of AI, right? US is leading the frontier models.
Mhm.
They have the capital to build this infrastructure. China is not far behind. Where does India come into this picture from your side, like based on what you saw in the AI
Yeah.
summit
By the way,
and
I
the
thought that was
investments which are
very, very
going in
well
India
done. The fact that we did that in India a couple of years ago, we as in India. Um, I think India has a huge role to play in AI in general. I'll unpack it. India is like the number 2 user of ChatGPT and Claude, right? So like after the US, like
Yeah.
biggest market for AI is there. But unfortunately, now it's like a consumer market. The biggest threat of AI is going to go after. Binod Kosa said this at the AI summit. He's like, this is going to be completely kill the. There will be like 2030. There'll be no IT service industry, no BPO left,
Yeah.
right? So that's
Yeah.
like a pretty big challenge for India if that's actually true, and if they don't reinvent, right? So, like you said, they're not gonna, India's not gonna win on frontier models. I don't even know if they're gonna win on data centers, right? Because just given the challenges with energy over there and all that, I do think there is a lot of nuances in India that can be done for India, but also be exported to other nations. So specifically, like you don't work on multi-language models in the US. We don't even think about like how do you have AI in like extremely low resource environments? How do you build AI tools when there's like a huge level of government oversight over things? We don't think about the fact that like the advantage India has also is India's actually ahead in terms of fintech, digital transactions, right? Like think about like other healthcare, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Those unique assets India has that we don't have in the US. So I do think there are pieces of vertical AI in maybe healthcare, fintech, localization with multi-link, where India can take a more of a leading role. I really hope that we rebuild, like India and the US rebuild ties, because I think especially in like a split world, if we have the resources, foundation models of the US, we have the market access to India, and all our tech companies in the US are in India anyways. And if we can work together on some joint solutions there, I think that will be like extremely useful for both the US and India.
And yeah, and that's why India is also, I mean, just from what you're saying, Jason, is also why India is pushing for sovereign AI, right?
Yeah.
Which is their own AI model that's less dependent on the Western world because of the challenges are different, right? Like you said, I mean, it's how do you provide for an AI service in a city or a village or an area that does not have the same level of resources as what we take for granted in the US, or perhaps even in a big city or metropolitan city in India, right? The challenges are different, right? And so,
The other advantage India has is like similar to the adoption of like mobile payments and things in India. Legacy, like we had legacy phone lines, we had legacy banks that the adoption for digital banking just was like longer. It took longer. In India, by necessity, because people didn't have access to regular banking, like mobile payments took off, right? So that's, I think, a good analogy that India should think about is like, where are there gaps right now that they can become AI first that the US can't because of our.
Yeah. And then again, like to your point, 6G can kind of help, right? Like if they move to 6G first and they have the infrastructure, they could be AI first. One question for you. If you were a strategy consultant for, let's say, TCS or Wipro, how would you be telling them, especially with AI disruption in their sector, which is services, what would you be recommending them or strategy wise
Yeah,
as
I
they
think
kind of evolve?
the biggest one is, well, two things. One, obviously, automate a lot of the work that you're doing right now. So before clients force you your rate cards for whatever, like developing an app, right? Like they used to be 4 people for 6 months to write an app or something. Clients were like, that no way in hell we're paying for that anymore, right? So before clients come to you and like get ahead of you, like you got to disrupt yourself with the right AI tool. That's like table stakes. I think a lot of them are starting to do that.
Yeah.
The other piece, I think I think there is so OpenAI, by the way, released their frontier
Model.
models for
Yeah.
B2B last
mm,
week. And for the first time, they're also recognizing the importance of actually to get AI at scale within enterprises, the services element is extremely important. So they have 4 partners right now. They have BCG, McKinsey, Cognizant, and Accenture signed up to essentially be like when an enterprise goes and buys a bunch of OpenAI licenses, they will essentially fund the services to be able to get the implementation adoption done. So they actually use the AI, right? That's the thesis behind it. They're realizing that companies can't just like take the AI and use it, right? So similar to software, there's an SI game for that. So I think that is a opportunity for all IT service companies. They already have the muscle for software implementation, but how do you move from that to much more broader AI at scale implementations? And there is work to be done on that. Like companies have extremely fragmented data sources. Data's not clean. So you think about like amount of work that goes into data cleansing, data setup, building data lakes, then having the APIs from the frontier models hook into that, then have the applications on top of that, right? There is a lot of work to be done to get any real value from AI. And the SIs, instead of doing BPO managed services, they should all be thinking about how do they get into more higher value, full stack AI consulting.
then you change the perception of where the value consulting is in the US and everything else can be done offshore to, hey, there are certain aspects of value consulting that can be done from from the Eastern world, right? That's the perception that, and like you said, companies have to reinvent to be able to sell that or offer those kind of services.
I do think that at some level, the reinvention is also at some levels easier to do in places like India, because it's typically like a younger workforce, they turn a lot more. So the ability, even within those large organizations like TCS, Infosys, the ability for them to drive change is also hard, right? Like as any large company. And I feel like the fact that they have like large pools of resources in India is actually a good thing, because like I think they can drive from that, and then maybe even have their Western counterparts follow a little bit.
Well, thanks, Jason. I think this was a great discussion. We covered a lot of topics. If you want to share something about yourself, where can the audience find you?
Yeah,
You're going to be in the Mobile World Congress. Maybe that's
I'll
where
be in
they'll find you.
Barcelona next week, so don't call
Yes.
then. I'm on LinkedIn, and like I'm sure you'll link our
Yeah,
platform.
we'll link all the articles we talked about today.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that'd be great.
profile too.
And then
Yeah.
I think my BCG email's on the articles, or it's easy. It's jj@bcg.com. So if you want something, reach out. Happy to connect.
And just for our audience who want to get in and just keeping up to date with all of the new AI, all things AI, are there any recommended curated sources that you typically go to that you would want to share with our audience that's reliable? What do you like?
I don't read like a broad set of sources. I'm typically Economist, Wall Street Journal, the tech part of the Wall Street Journal, and the information is actually like it's a expensive subscription, but I feel like it's totally worth it. They have like well researched, cutting edge, a lot of exclusive scoops they get. Like right now, like 95% of their work is on AI, and it's actually very well done. So honestly, with those three, like that keeps me pretty busy from a reading perspective. But all three of them are like have different perspectives on things too. So there's a good balance as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, look, thank you so much,
Great,
Jason,
great
for
conversation. We enjoyed it. Good chatting with you both.
yeah.